Simon Meers. He's a member of the Django core team who has the pleasure of Python and Django daily as a freelance developer based in Wollongong. And he will be talking about Django Unstrained, making Django even more enjoyable than it is already.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. So it just seemed like a moderately clever pun at the time, but has turned into a helpful umbrella term for helping me to think of ways in which we can make Django development less of a strain and more pleasant. Unfortunately, it might be Django Unstrained. How's the back? Can you see? I can't make the font bigger. I'm going to have wrapping issues, so hopefully you'll be able to get through it. Okay, so who am I? My name's Simon. You may have seen me online as Dr. Meers. I discovered Django in 2008 with much joy. I was a university lecturer in computer science at the time, doing PhD research and all sorts of other things. I was tinkering with web development for a decade or so before that. And as Alex said this morning, discovering Django made me realise that web development could actually be fun. And very quickly my career turned around and now I am a full-time developer. In fact, PyCon 2010 sort of started the snowball of networking required to give me enough work to do that full-time. I've been a core developer since 2010, however I have to use the term very loosely. My contributions to Django's core are a drop in the ocean compared to any of the other core developers here, but the title is nice. And part of the reason of that is I just have far too many deadlines. You know, raising 3 kids with my wife, finishing my PhD, all that sort of stuff. There's always going to be reasons, and lots of clients at the moment. Lots of client work is what I'm, pardon me, doing at the moment. So always jumping from one project to the next and never stopping for long enough to actually work on the open source stuff, which is something I hope to remedy in the near future. So, framework is, Django is a fantastic general purpose framework. It's not the ultimate framework in some situations. There may be better options available, but I find there are many problems that it can solve, and it is an excellent skill to have, being able to use it. It is rolling along nicely. The 1.6 beta was released just recently, so we start features for the 1.7 release coming out soon. And it is a very community-driven thing, being an open source framework. I assume that the community is you guys, but it is an assumption. How many of you have used Django before? Because I know there are a couple people here who haven't. Okay, so that's the majority. How many of you have created a ticket or commented on a ticket or something or other for Django? Okay, about 30%. How many of you have submitted a patch to Django? 10%? How many of those patches actually got committed? And have any of you set up Django applications to share with the world? Third-party stuff. Whoa, that's more so. That's cool. Okay, so it is our framework, and we are the ones responsible for making it better. So before we know it, Django 2 will suddenly be upon us, and we get to determine what that's going to look like. So if you were to write the release notes for 2.0, what would you like to see in it? Because to a large degree, you can actually determine that. Theoretically, the sky is the limit. In practice, the limit is actually more of a combination of the combined imagination of the community, like in this room, the amount of time we are willing to put in, which guilty is charged, and the amount of cooperation in the way in which we can make that happen. So I would encourage you, as you're developing, don't just get frustrated with the framework and go, oh, this is something that Django doesn't do very well, and move on. Think about how can we solve that moving forward to make Django even more awesome. So make a list of the things that you would like to see fixed in Django and make a plan to figure out how to do it. If you have no idea how to solve it, you know the problem's there at least, make sure that people know about the problem, and let's figure out ways to move forward. We probably want to avoid adding too many more features into Django's core. We really don't want this massive unmaintainable lump of code. I think, if anything, Django in future releases should probably lose weight and have just better hooks for more elegant third-party applications hooking in. We want to make the core very, very flexible so that you can do amazing things with it going forward and have an excellent community of third-party apps. So if you have a brilliant idea for Django, don't just suddenly write a massive patch and then go and submit it. First of all, make sure that you check whether it has already been on the ticket tracker. Check the developer mailing lists. There may have already been discussions on the topic. And also think, does this idea actually belong in a separate application? Should it be in the core, or are we just adding to the bloat? Is there something in the core we need to adjust to accommodate that framework? So, as I said, there's a very rich ecosystem of Django apps out there. If you search GitHub, which will obviously only give you the apps on GitHub, for Django, you get something like this, and this is up to date. Apparently Django was updated 2 hours ago. I've sorted these by the number of people watching the repository. Again, it's not necessarily an accurate snapshot, but it's a snapshot of some of the more popular Django applications. And I've got the top 100 here. I'm not going to spend time going into each of them, particularly not the top ones that you guys have probably seen before. It's kind of the middle ones that are more interesting. In doing this myself, I found a number of things that I hadn't come across before that should have. I think we should all be keeping an eye on the apps that are out there and which ones are moving forward and contributing to those. There was a few things from my little toolbox that I was going to share, and I thought, oh, there's an app there that actually does a lot better than I was doing it, so I should be using that instead. So there's a number of social authentications, Django extensions we've talked about already today, a few CMS applications, Haystack. Crispy Forms is one of those ones I have not actually used, but it looks fairly neat, and I think the Forms framework could do with probably some of that could be contributed into the core. Django Compressor Pipeline has replaced that. Grappelli for the admin, reversion. Target, you can see some of these are getting a little bit old. Basic Apps, for example, was 7 months since the last commit to that. User management, if you see anything there, that's probably worth, you can just do this search yourself on GitHub later on. You don't need to write it down necessarily, but take a note of the apps that you should look into and have a quick look at what they do and use them in your application. Django All-Auth has been already covered today. We know that handles Python 3. More social applications, more admin stuff. So all sorts of useful apps. Hopefully we should be using these instead of reinventing the wheel ourselves every time we come up against a problem. Django Floppy Forms is another interesting form one. Django Braces has a bunch of view mixins. There's caches, etc. I'm not going to go through all of them. So, snippets. Can I see a show of hands? How many people have bookmarks in their browser for Django Snippets or Stack Overflow? Oh, I know how I fixed that before. I'm going to go to the browser and grab that. Anyone regularly do that when they're solving a problem? I'm wondering how many of those things should really be packaged up into applications. Sometimes you may even have something that's almost a one-liner, but by the time you go and add some documentation to explain how to use it and some tests and whatever else, an app might not be a bad thing for it. Or we could have a big kitchen sink application with all these sorts of things in it, or you might maintain your own personal little library of shortcuts. I was just going to give you a peek into my little such application at the moment, which is a thing I call Django Generic, which is not intended for public consumption really. It's highly experimental. But when I've been developing applications recently, whenever I'm finding a pattern that is repeating between two different projects, I go, right, okay, I force myself to take that out, make it generic, and reuse it between these different projects. So it is a bit experimental and messy. I'll throw features in there. I'm facing a deadline. just put it in there very quickly, try it out. It may end up being not such a good idea, or I just wasn't thinking straight in the first place, should be deleted. There's a bunch of stuff in there at the moment that should be deleted. Maybe it already exists, like I've discovered in preparing this. There's a bunch of stuff there that could be removed because other apps already do it better. Or there's a few things in there that may actually be good ideas for creating new apps and we can all use and share and contribute to. So a lot of the stuff in there is based on admin, which is where a lot of my clients have weird and wonderful requirements for things that they would like the admin to do. So I'll take you through a few examples there. Here's a batch update mixin which you can use to select a bunch of fields that you would like to be updatable. You use an admin action to go and say, you tick the ones you want, batch update, and you get a form based on the fields that you selected that should be batch updatable. Put it in there and press update. Useful feature. Should it be contributed to admin? Probably not. Might make a useful third-party app. It's only going to be the really most generic ones and most useful and universally applicable ones that would be useful in the core. Cooked IDs is a kind of interesting term. Raw ID fields you've probably all used. There's those drop-down foreign key lists become very unwieldy very quickly as the numbers increase, as you want to search and filter on what you're looking up. You have a page that suddenly takes 3 minutes to load because it's got 100 drop-downs with 1,000 items in each. So we resort to raw IDs and the client goes, there's numbers with commas in a field, what's this? And it's a problem that's not very difficult to solve. In this little mix-in, I just replace raw ID fields with cooked ID fields, and you get something like this where you can delete and add new ones and whatever else, and you actually see a textual representation of what it is that you've got. Works with many-to-many and foreign keys and those sorts of things. So this is a problem we should be solving in the admin. And it's a problem that has been discussed in tickets and discussed recently on the mailing list as well, and I, again, haven't had time to actually look into it properly and get involved there. It's maybe something we could do in the sprints. CSV exporting, every client seems to want to be able to get the data out of the admin. This is a mix-in that I use to do that. However, I found an app called Django Import Export, which I haven't used, but looks like it may well do it more nicely than that. Email-based users. Since Django 1.5, we now don't have to have username fields anymore, and I'm finding that a very good thing. And in most of my applications, I now have users with emails as their primary, or not primary key, but their unique identifier. Instead of, and for a while there, I was copying and pasting code out of Django's docs to give me the user model and the methods that it needed to provide as a minimum, and the managers, and the admin, and the forms, and those sorts of things. So this is something that I use that helps to make that nicer, and you can just add whatever fields you need to in your particular model. Nested inlines has been something that's discussed. Often the admin has trouble accommodating when you have some sort of model which has a bunch of child models, and each of those have children, and it can go quite deeply in some applications. Nested inlines, I'm not sure if they're such a good idea necessarily. There's an implementation on that ticket, I think. I haven't looked into it. Again, time. The workaround that I've been using is a thing called a change link inline, where you get to edit the top level stuff, and you can reorder things and change the titles and delete and whatever else, and you have a not yet saved. If you haven't saved it yet, you save and continue, and then you can go and actually edit each of those in more detail. And of course that's able to be used nested further and further down, and sort of infinite nesting, a little bit of a user experience overhead with having to save and continue in each one, but that's working for a number of clients quite nicely. And I've also got, in that case, a change form only admin, which is where the model admin only works as a change form. You don't have a change list because it's only relevant to within the context of its parent. So the parent provides the inlines. The inlines are the change list for that particular model. And so it removes the change view, so you don't get this list of intermediate models out of context. Thumbnails. Everyone seems to want thumbnails on their admin. I've just written it again for a while. I was copying and pasting the same 5 lines of code to generate a thumbnail in the list view. But I've got a mixin that makes that much more easy, and also works in inlines as well. And you can change configurations, change your source, change your options of your thumbnail, all those sorts of things. So now I just have a 1-line import, which makes that much easier. And now in between my apps, I can share that functionality and improve it with each project instead of it growing stagnant in one of the old ones that I have used. Polymorphism. I don't know if you've come across Carl's Django model utils, but I use it in almost every project. The inheritance manager is an interesting component of that, which allows you to have multi-table inheritance going on, where you apply the inheritance manager to the parent model, and when you ask it for a query set, it gives you back a polymorphic query set with each of the objects as its sort of leaf node class, which is very handy, and it does it efficiently using select related. I've developed a polymorphic admin which works with that, so you apply that admin to the top level model, and you get in the change list you see all of them there. If you go to add one, for example, it has an intermediate form where you say, okay, which type of element am I going to add? And then that all works nicely there as well. So there's a few of those little things that are helpful. You might want to dig in or ask me more about it later. Admin links is something that I've been finding very helpful. This little snippet will just add a link to the given for creating a new instance of foobar being app model. And of course it also checks whether the user in the context has the permissions to add that. If not, it doesn't show the link and so on. So all of that logic is hidden away, because that was something I was doing again and again. I thought, right, package it up. You can add query string parameters if you want to pre-fill fields and things like that. Change links as well for a particular object instance. We'll give you change links. You can make it, load it into a URL so that you can wrap it in case you have to enclose it in some HTML. You can change parameters such as that. So I think there is a place for something like that, probably in its own little app. And a return URL admin mixin too. So when you click on one of these links, it actually takes you to the admin. After you make your changes, you save it, and it takes you back out to the front end page where you clicked the link from in the first place. So again, little things like that that just take some of the strain out and remove the tedium from my everyday work. This is an interesting one. Recently I had a client who wanted to drop like 110 megabyte or more photos into the admin and upload them, and wondered why the server was taking a little while to respond. So I created this neat little widget where you drop a bunch of images, and actually using HTML5 it resizes those images in the browser much more quickly than the upload would take, and then sends the size that we need to the browser, which is to the server, which is quite handy. That's a Mozilla link there for how that actually works. But lots of things that we can do, lots of ideas for different apps. I talked about testing in my talk at PyCon last year. I've got a bunch of test utils for making tests as quick and easy as possible, for checking things in the template, checking context with callables, checking for whether things are contained in the response based on case sensitivity or not contained, just shortcuts for any of those things that I find myself doing again and again. I'm trying to cut it down to the minimum of code to be able to do it very, very quickly. Email, a fallback email message that sends to admins or somebody else if if there's actually no recipients that turn up for it. Template email, the idea of being able to have a single template which has blocks for the subject and body and possibly the HTML if you're going to go multi-part, with template inheritance, so you can have your signatures and your greetings and so on in the inheritance stack there. URLs, these are literally 2 one-liners that I use for nesting patterns and namespaces in a similar fashion to that, to sort of dry out some of my URL configurations, because I find they often work on a nested thing. There might be a URL refactor we can do there. There's decorators for caching results in instances in models. There's management commands for creating proxy permissions. Again, there's a number of these things where I've worked around for a ticket because I just needed to solve it very quickly instead of actually going and fixing the ticket, which is not ideal. Middleware for auth, for things if you are putting a site on Heroku for a staging site or something, you want to wrap it in some auth. Generic templates, a lot of these things just allow me to get a site up and running very quickly with front-end branded registration pages, default login pages, pagination templates, any of those things that you find yourself doing again and again. I think we can find ways of making them much quicker and easier. And more, there's Linkify as a handy little tag that is used sometimes. Unescape is a filter that I'm not sure why it doesn't exist, but I've needed it several times. File size filter likes to blow up if you give it a file that doesn't exist, so I've got a file exists filter to prevent that. I've got a little experimental functionality for reversing static based on the storage backend, but being able to still use that within your JavaScript, which is a problem I've come across a few times. And lots more. There's tokens. I think I'm running out of time to go through them all, but I'll put these up online so you can have a look later on. Generating tokens is a common thing, and also hashed URL views where you actually include a hash at the end of the URL so that you can't modify the URL or the parameters in it, and it adds a bit of a layer of security there. That's a mixin that wraps that up all nicely for you. And views, I was going to share a bunch of my views, but I found that things like braces, I think, already cover a lot of things that I had and more, but I've got a few view mix in there as well. I won't go through all of those, but just good for us to be aware of the sorts of things that other people out there have already built and we could utilize and contribute to. Forms, again, I've got a bunch of form stuff, and I thought, well, actually, having not used but recently seen floppy forms and crispy forms, I think they probably cover more than any of my stuff was going to cover, so have a look at those. Models, like I said, Django Model Utils is excellent. I use choices and pass-through manager in almost every project I work on. If you haven't used pass-through manager before, it basically means you define your query set and you define a manager, and you say this manager is a pass-through manager, so anything my query set can do, my manager can also do. So it allows you to chain those methods on your query sets and managers. So that's a snippet of my snippets, the ideas that I have for taking some of the tedium out of development, any of the things we're doing repeatedly, trying to make Django development easier and more pleasant. However, my ideas are only a very, very small pool of ideas compared to all of our imaginations combined. So let's work together and take all of your ideas and turn them into something awesome in Django going forward. So Django itself, as we're going forward into new releases, and also in the apps around it that support it that we all use and enjoy every day. End of show. So.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions?
Thanks, Simon. Do you know ahead of time where you're going to be publishing these notes?
I'll probably put it on GitHub/Dr. Meers.
No worries, thanks.
Any more questions?
Hey, one of my thoughts about this, about like lots of little generic utilities, and one of the things you notice if you look at different people's code or different projects, and you find that a lot of developers have their own ways of doing things, and there are already things out there that do what they want, but someone has decided to do something else just because, and it comes down to personal preferences really. And so my thought is that it might actually be useful for some of these things to be in core just so that there is an established pattern for doing something. Because I just find the lots of different utilities out there a little bit confusing. So what are your thoughts about that?
I think if it's definitely an established best practice, then we can get that stuff into core. I think in general we should be just making core more flexible and having pluggable things. But there's certainly a place for if there is something that is definitely the best way forward. We talked about Factory Boy earlier today, maybe things like that. If we decide, yes, that is the de facto standard for Django, then absolutely we could be adding those things in.
Any more questions?
Did you say that code, is that actually available anywhere, your code library?
The Django Generic?
Yeah, your library that you wrote, yeah, the Meers generic
Yes,
library.
the generic package is on my Bitbucket account, so it wouldn't have showed up on GitHub. So Bitbucket, again, Dr. Meers, and you'll be able to find it there. I'll actually put the slide, which this is actually Python code as well. I'll put that up too.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, any more questions? Otherwise, thank you, Simon.